Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. Dallas, Texas. Wednesday, September 2nd, 2015, just before 8 p.m. Uptown is busy, the evening traffic steady. In the camera-watched garage beneath Gables Park 17, a pediatric dentist named Kendra Hatcher, 35, rolls in after dinner plans. In a span measured in heartbeats, a woman crumples beside her car, and within minutes, 911 lights up across Dallas. What looks at first like a quick robbery will demand something colder from the evidence. A plan. The timeline locks fast because the garage records almost everything. At approximately 7:42 p.m., Hatcher's sedan clears the gate. Security cameras track her lane of travel as she pulls into a marked spot. Around 7:45 p.m., callers report a single gunshot echoing across concrete. Patrol is dispatched and arrives within minutes. Medics move in, and the first officer establishes a perimeter line, keeping the garage from swallowing crucial seconds under tires and shoes. It's controlled access, bright enough for cameras, and that matters. Initial observations are clinical. The driver door sits ajar. A purse is missing. The phone is recovered near the vehicle. A spent cartridge and metal fragment glint under the garage lights. The lighting is functional. Cameras are working. There's no forced entry to the gate system. And a note is added to the first log that will matter for the rest of this case. No firearm is recovered at the scene. That's negative evidence, and it narrows options. Whoever fired that round left with the weapon and left quickly. Officers call the apartment management for immediate access to camera retention. A do not overwrite hold is placed on all feeds, and the CAD log picks up the running clock. Scene secure, shell casing marked, witness canvas active. A resident tells a patrol officer they heard one sharp report, then saw a dark SUV, described later as a black Jeep, accelerate up the ramp. The description is limited by distance and lighting, but it anchors direction of travel. Another resident mentions a scream or shout, uncertain under the echo, then silence. One shot. Not a volley, not a fight. That matters too. The first crime scene techs move with practiced economy. They photograph the door ajar angle and tire tracks near the stall. They bag the casing and fragment, flagging each with time, location, and orientation markers. They note the camera angles and the blind spots because every structure has them, and sketch a path between entry gate and exit ramp. On the radio, hold all vehicles at the exit until we clear. In controlled spaces, traffic is evidence. Nothing suggests a random brawl. The garage is badge controlled with regular vehicle flow, not the chaos of a public lot. Staging a robbery here, under cameras and on a weekday evening, carries more risk than payoff. That discrepancy gets written down, not as a conclusion, but as an anomaly. According to police reports and contemporaneous media, the working label on the incident board is cautious, possible robbery, cause and manner pending medical examiner review, shooter unknown. The witness canvas continues in short, targeted loops. Residents are asked for exact times, not impressions. When did you park? Did you use the elevator? Which level? A single gunshot after 7:40 p.m. repeats across statements. Any additional pops? No. Anyone touch the victim or the vehicle before police? No. Did anyone see a face? Most say no. The structure amplifies sound but compresses sightlines. Cameras see more than the eye. Investigators mark what's present and what's absent. Present: a casing, a fragment, a phone, a door ajar, cameras, and witnesses. Absent: the gun, any second shell casing, and any forced breach at the gate. Absent also, the random disorder robberies often leave, spilled contents, scattered credit cards, the frantic rummaging that cameras love. The emptiness is data. In homicide work, what isn't there can speak first. Lock the feeds, the supervisor says. Camera IDs and timestamps get paired to the CAD clock, to the first officer's body cam ping, to the elevator logs. This sequencing is the backbone of a case like this. In 2015, carrier records and surveillance make or break timelines. There's no reliance on app tracking or Find My shortcuts that didn't exist in the public tools we use today. A detective mutters something that becomes the quiet refrain of the next few weeks. The data may align too cleanly. Sometimes that's the problem. If it's staged to look simple, the job is to let the clocks argue with each other until simple breaks. Meanwhile, the human step that must be handled with care proceeds, notifying next of kin. Supervisors coordinate with investigators who know how to deliver irretrievable news. A medical examiner representative is contacted, and transport is scheduled for later that night. We won't detail that here because the morgue is a different scene and that belongs to the next chapter. What keeps this case from collapsing into speculation in the first hour are three choices. Preserve video before it overwrites, document anomalies without declaring a theory, and map every timestamp to a single running clock. In a structure like this, clean floors, even lights, steady cameras, the honesty of the record is either a gift or a trap. The only way to tell is to test it. Two questions for you to carry forward. Why pick a camera-saturated, controlled-access garage if the goal is a quick robbery? And what does it mean when a shooter leaves nothing behind but a casing and leaves within minutes? If you were building a timeline from scratch, where would you look first? The cameras, the phones, or the car? From concrete to cold room, the evidence keeps the same clock. The transfer is recorded in routine language that matters later. Date, time, location, personnel, seal numbers. Dallas Police releases custody of Kendra Hatcher's remains to the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences, Dallas County Medical Examiner. A property officer verifies tamper tape, photographs each seal, and signs the carrier sheet. That sheet, mundane as it looks, prevents arguments months later about who touched what and when. Clothing is bagged separately in paper, not plastic, to avoid moisture degradation. Fingernail scrapings, oral swabs, and trace lifts are logged under individual item numbers. The casing and metal fragment collected at the garage remain with DPD property. Their numbers are cross-referenced on the ME's intake so that scene artifacts and autopsy findings can be paired without guesswork. Before any incision, the pathologist completes exterior documentation, height and weight estimates, identifying marks, clothing condition, and visible injuries. Photographs are taken with and without scales. Wounds are measured, oriented to anatomical landmarks, and diagrammed. The start point is a single firearm entry defect at the posterior head. There is no second gunshot injury noted. No cutting, bruising, or defensive pattern clusters consistent with a prolonged struggle are documented on the hands or forearms. Those lines in the report are not drama. They bound the narrative to what can be seen, not what anyone fears. Trajectory work begins with probes and radiographs. The path is consistent with a close-range shot to the back of the head that produced immediate, profound incapacitation. The downward travel is recorded relative to skull landmarks. Precise angles are kept in the sealed report and later summarized for court. Internal injuries are what you would expect from that path. Catastrophic damage along the brainstem corridor. The time between impact and loss of the ability to act would have been measured in seconds. That finding aligns with the garage's quiet timeline, one shot, then flight, without restaging the scene. Gunshot residue assessment is performed using accepted protocols. The report does not claim conclusions beyond its scope. It notes patterns that are consistent with close range and defers weapon-specific questions to ballistics. Soot and stippling, where present and documented, are used to classify distance. When lighting or surfaces complicate that classification, the report says so. The value here is restraint. Autopsy distance estimations must leave room for what the lab can and cannot tie to a particular firearm later. Clothing is examined for bullet defects, fiber transfers, and trace. Each cut and defect is photographed before garments are opened for internal inspection. And a fabric fiber inventory is made to allow comparison with scene fibers collected near the vehicle. If later analysis shows a unique fiber type or dye signature, the chain already exists to connect the garment, the parking level, and any vehicle associated with the suspect. Swabs are retained for possible touch DNA comparisons. They are not over-interpreted at this stage. Toxicology samples, blood, urine where obtainable, vitreous humor, are drawn, labeled, and refrigerated under ME custody. Results will be reported later. At this point, nothing about manner or cause depends on tox. The cause is firearm injury. The manner, pending law enforcement investigation, will be classified in the final certificate consistent with the criminal case posture. The autopsy does not speculate about motive, staging, or robbery. It describes injuries and preserves samples. That separation protects the case from claims that the pathologist ventured into detective work. A chain coordinator performs the handoff of biological evidence back to DPD property. with a receipt that includes item numbers, case numbers, and the timestamp. The coordinator also issues a standing note to prosecutors. Trajectory, range classification, and injury pattern are ready for expert summary if charges are filed. That note isn't a recommendation, it's an availability flag so the trial team can plan which witnesses will carry which parts of the record. In American courts, a clean division of expertise reduces attack surfaces at suppression or trial. The medical examiner's summary lines up with the garage timeline established earlier without repeating it. One shot, close range, immediate incapacitation. That controls speculative statements about prolonged assault and avoids importing the word execution into a clinical document. The report's value to investigators is twofold. First, it refines time of injury and functional capacity, which supports camera and phone window analysis. Second, it secures biological and trace evidence under a chain that can survive cross-examination. A short human truth belongs here, stated plainly. Clinical language can feel cold, but accuracy respects the person more than adjectives do. The most direct path to accountability in cases like this is a record that doesn't wobble when tested. In towns and cities alike, murders aren't only crimes, they fracture routines. The commute home, the parking space, the lock on a familiar door. The best answer the system can give is a careful, provable sequence. With the autopsy complete, investigators now have 3 anchors to test against digital data: a tight injury window, a direction of travel through the head, and confirmation of a single round. The next step is to match those anchors to camera feeds, access logs, and carrier records so that movement, not opinion, drives the case forward. The cold room has done its job. Now the pixels, pings, and paths have to agree, or expose the lie. The parking structure is treated like a laboratory. Investigators mark out a tight footprint around Kendra Hatcher's stall and work inward. Discovery has already been documented. What matters now is reconstruction. Measurements fix the door ajar angle, tire positions, and sightlines from cameras to the space where she fell. A casing and a metal fragment are photographed, labeled, and rechecked against the running incident clock so there's no dispute about when each item was collected. Nothing is removed without a placement photo and a scale. Entry is the first problem to solve. The garage's controlled access, gate logs, and camera windows show vehicles tailing in close behind authorized cars. That pattern, a piggyback entry, doesn't prove intent, but it explains how an unregistered vehicle could be inside without a badge swipe. Investigators pull exit footage too, matching headlight signatures and plate placements to the earlier inbound clips. The working hypothesis is simple and testable. The same Jeep seen near the time of the gunshot leaves within minutes on the same route. Timestamps from cameras are synced to dispatch logs to eliminate drift. Technicians rotate to trace. They dust the driver's side exterior and nearby handrails for latent prints, then turn to fibers and touch DNA where the purse would have been carried or grabbed. Swabs are taken from the door edge and handle. Every lift card and swab tube gets a distinct item number tied back to the property ledger. None of this declares a suspect. It preserves options. If a comparison later hits on a known person, the chain is already courtroom ready. Lighting and coverage are documented as they are, not as anyone wishes them to be. A camera grid is drafted. Which angles capture the lane in, which capture the slot, which capture the exit ramp. Blind spots are marked so the report can explain why a single action, like a handoff or a quick step out of frame, wasn't recorded. Where the image is soft, technicians note distance, glare, or occlusion so that any enhancement request has context. Neighbors are canvassed for external cameras facing ingress and egress streets. Those homeowners and business owners sign quick consent forms so their footage can be duplicated before it overwrites. The victim's phone is bagged for later extraction under warrant. The missing purse is documented as absence, not theory. Vehicle-to-vehicle transfer, someone reaching briefly into Hatcher's car then moving away, is sought in the frames bracketing 7:42 to 7:47 p.m. The Jeep becomes a track rather than a guess. Inbound shot, idle near the slot, outbound ramp, each step annotated with times that align to the autopsy's immediate incapacitation finding from Chapter 2 without retelling the scene. 2 labels keep the team honest: working and confirmed. Working, piggyback entry, latent prints pending, possible fiber transfer, outbound sequence tied to the same Jeep. Confirmed, 1 casing recovered, 1 metal fragment recovered, door found ajar, cameras functioning, No forced breach to the gate. Confirmed items are locked to photos and logs. Working items demand lab reports or corroborating digital records before they move categories. That vocabulary stops overreach when the case leaves the garage and enters the courtroom. There is a human layer that doesn't require flourish. Careful processing honors the person by refusing shortcuts. In cities like Dallas, murders aren't just crimes. They interrupt ordinary routines: parking, locking, taking the elevator home. Precision is how you put order back. Next, the movement records, cameras and carriers, must align. If the Jeep's timeline is genuine, its digital shadow will exist somewhere off the concrete. The garage map is set. Now the clocks have to agree. Detectives pull synchronized exports from every camera that sees the entry lane, the victim slot, and the exit ramp. Timestamps are corrected to dispatch time, so a minute in one feed equals a minute in another. In that stitched window, a dark SUV, identified later as a black Jeep, appears before Kendra Hatcher's sedan arrives, idles within sight of her space, and departs within minutes of the single report neighbors called in. No narration is added to the images. The frames speak for themselves. Carrier records come next. Warrants obtain call detail records and cell site summaries for phones of interest. The rule is simple and error-correct for 2015. Voice, SMS metadata, and tower sectors, not GPS apps. Analysts flag dark intervals, periods where devices either power down or drop off the network, in the late afternoon and early evening. Then note reactivations that coincide with towers serving the uptown corridor. Where a device blinks on near the time the Jeep is captured leaving the structure, that correlation is logged as working until a witness or a lab report converts it to confirmed. The victim's phone, bagged at scene, is processed under warrant by a certified examiner. Extraction returns call and text histories, recent contacts, and basic app timestamps. Analysts chart the last known use before she parked and any unanswered calls that hit later that night. The purpose isn't to intrude, it's to anchor when she was reachable and when she wasn't. That timeline pairs with the autopsy's immediate incapacitation finding without restating the garage event. Text threads and recent dials on phones tied to potential witnesses are compared to carrier logs for gaps or bursts of activity around the window. Short timestamp messages arranged in a sequence can function like a travel log. Where two phones move together across towers, or one device repeatedly touches a tower facing the same corridor the Jeep used, those patterns are marked. If a phone goes quiet in the hour before the shot and reappears just after, that isn't guilt. It's a place to ask better questions in the next round of interviews. Detectives also check for search activity captured on a seized handset associated with a person of interest, news queries about the shooting, local media headlines, or firearm terms in the hours after the crime. When present, those are cataloged with caution and treated as working until tied to location and contact patterns. The aim is to avoid chasing clicks and focus on movement. Finally, the video and the towers are laid on a single board: inbound Jeep frames, victim arrival, outbound Jeep frames, phone reactivations, brief calls or texts clustered just after. The alignment is close enough to pursue, but not so tidy that it rests unchecked. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. That quiet skepticism keeps the team focused on corroboration, not convenience. Next, interviews have to stand against these clocks. What people say they were doing versus what the cameras and carriers record. By the time the video and carrier grids line up, words have to meet clocks. Detectives start with short, structured interviews. Time anchors first, narrative second. Residents recount a single sharp report and a dark Jeep pulling away. Those statements are recorded with exact timestamps and quickly compared to the synchronized camera window. Where a witness places the Jeep too early or too late, the report notes the variance without argument. Memory is respected. The clocks decide. Attention shifts to people linked to that Jeep. A lender confirms he allowed someone he knew to use it around early September and mentions a casual plan to eat out during the early evening, a detail later offered as an alibi. That alibi is tested against the carrier sectors serving the restaurant corridor and against the video time window. Where a phone never touches a tower near the restaurant until after the shooting, the discrepancy is flagged for follow-up. Small contradictions matter most when the timeline is tight. One interview moves from denial to cooperation. A young woman describes serving as the driver and outlines multiple planning ideas before the garage attack: an injection scenario, a kidnapping, then a decision to stage a fast robbery. She says she was promised $500 for the ride and that the shooter expected cash and drugs as compensation. Detectives map her account to the video: arrival before the victim, idling within sight, departure within minutes. It matches the frames more closely than guesses tend to do. Her phone records are pulled with consent and warrant. Short texts and brief calls cluster just before and just after the event. That pattern, activity bracketing a dark interval, tracks the carrier grid built in the last chapter. The same witness details the Jeep's movements after the shooting and mentions talk of repainting it later. Detectives treat that line cautiously. It can sound like hindsight. But when the lender separately references repaint chatter, the convergence earns a working tag, pending any material receipt or third-party confirmation. Investigators also note a claimed stop for food during the critical window. The cameras along the corridor do not place the Jeep there when the statement says it was. That doesn't close a case, it narrows a route. Another interview focuses on the alleged shooter. The person of interest denies involvement and distances himself from the Jeep, yet a seized phone, later lawfully searched, shows post-offense news queries and firearm imagery in the hours after the crime. Detectives do not argue motive in the room. They chart the sequence and preserve the devices. Where his stated location conflicts with cell site directionality, opposite side of town, wrong sector face, that contradiction goes to the board with time and tower listed. With each session, the process stays the same. Capture the statement cleanly, cross-index it to the timeline, tag each point preliminary, working, or confirmed. The autopsy's immediate incapacitation supports the short window established by cameras. The carrier records support or dismantle alibis. Precision replaces speculation. In busy cities, murders aren't just crimes. They test how well institutions listen to what the records already say. Next, procurement and planning, vehicles, money, and the pathway to a weapon either exist on paper and pixels, or they don't. Plans leave paper and pixels. Detectives now follow those. The vehicle came first. The black Jeep spotted idling in the garage wasn't stolen, it was borrowed. Investigators traced it back to a woman who admitted she had lent it to the driver that night. That detail established access without having to recreate the garage timeline. The lender's cooperation quickly led detectives to the getaway driver, whose testimony later became central in court. The payment trail was just as important. The cooperating driver testified she was promised $500 for her role, while the gunman expected drugs and cash. Forensics met testimony. On her phone, detectives recovered a photo of money time-stamped just hours after the crime. That single digital file corroborated her account that compensation changed hands quickly. The shooter's package included marijuana and cocaine, details confirmed under oath and cross-checked with phone records. Each element, from amount to timing, shifted from preliminary to confirmed as multiple sources aligned. Planning wasn't limited to the weapon. Before the garage shooting, several scenarios were proposed: an injection, a sedative, even a staged kidnapping. None were carried out. Testimony revealed those early conversations, showing that the ultimate decision, to strike in the garage with a handgun, was not spontaneous but refined after weeks of failed ideas. Detectives mapped this evolution as proof of deliberation, not impulse. The firearm itself tied the threads together. Ballistics matched the shell casing found at the scene with a semi-automatic handgun recovered later. Ownership records showed it had changed hands in Dallas only weeks before the attack. Chain of custody logs were kept clean, preserving admissibility for trial. Jurors would later hear that the weapon was not simply found, but tied step by step to the shooter, and by extension, to the plan. Behind every crime, there is a path of preparation. In this one, cars, cash, phones, and guns built the structure of intent. Each trace was a nail in that frame, closing off claims of accident or chance. From planning to prosecution, intent now has to meet statute. Prosecutors outline the cleanest Texas path to capital: murder for remuneration and employing another to commit murder for remuneration. The elements line up with what investigators already pinned down: negotiated payment to a driver, drugs and cash to a gunman, and a target selected in advance. For the shooter, the theory also fits capital murder during a robbery, since the purse was taken as the gunman fled within minutes. For the organizer, the statute's other prong, employing another, addresses the distance between ordering a killing and pulling a trigger. In a courtroom, that distance doesn't reduce culpability, it defines it. Charging decisions move in parallel to arrests. The cooperating driver is booked on a murder count and later pleads to a term that reflects her role and cooperation. The alleged shooter is charged with capital murder. Aggravators include remuneration and the theft tied to the assault. The alleged organizer is indicted on capital murder, but by the time the grand jury signs the bill, she's left the country. Flight changes tempo. The goal shifts from a local arrest to an international return that will hold up at trial. Dallas police hand off fugitive work to a federal local task force. FBI agents and U.S. Marshals step in alongside the Dallas County District Attorney. A warrant is paired with a provisional arrest request to Mexico under the treaty. Public notices go out and a federal reward is announced. The organizer is soon elevated to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives, a move used sparingly and only when an arrest is considered both high priority and realistically achievable with public help. Tips track movement inside Mexico. Months later, Mexican authorities take her into custody without incident. Extradition is law, not television. Mexico prohibits extradition where the death penalty is possible unless the requesting nation provides assurances. Prosecutors provide that assurance for the organizer. No death penalty will be sought as a condition of return. That promise is formal, written, and later honored in court. It does not bind the state's approach to the gunman, who remains within U.S. jurisdiction. His exposure to capital punishment stays intact under Texas law. The contrast is procedural, not sentimental. Two defendants under two different legal frameworks. Meanwhile, the lab and paper trails keep feeding the case file. The Jeep access that began as testimony is supported by a lender's statement and contact logs. The payment figure promised to the driver and the compensation promised to the shooter are now sworn lines with device corroboration. Ballistics ties the casing to the recovered handgun. Chain of custody seals are intact front to back. Interview contradictions, alibis placed in the wrong cell sector, movements that miss the camera windows, are summarized for prosecutors as impeachment exhibits. In a capital filing, every contradiction has a job: narrow motive, fix identity, or prove deliberation. Back in Dallas, a grand jury issues true bills that mirror the charging theory. The driver's negotiated plea locks in her testimony for trial. The shooter remains in custody, awaiting a capital trial setting. When the organizer lands back in Texas under the no-death penalty agreement, prosecutors publicly confirm the condition to avoid later challenges. A scheduling conference sets the path forward. Capital trial first for the shooter, then the organizer's trial on life exposure. There's a narrow human truth in this part of the work. Interagency cases live or die on trust, between detectives who build timelines, analysts who keep the clock straight, agents who cross borders, and prosecutors who carry every chain of custody page into court. In cities like Dallas, murders aren't just crimes. They test whether those institutions can move in one line without stepping on each other's evidence. Next comes the pretrial fight, suppression issues, accomplice corroboration instructions, and what the jury will be allowed to hear when the capital trials start. Courtrooms replace interviews. From here on, every exhibit has to survive rules. Pretrial hearings narrow the field. Defense teams move to suppress phone extractions and limit cell site mapping. Prosecutors answer with examiner credentials, hash values, and chain of custody logs that track each device from seizure to report. Video exports from the garage are authenticated by the custodians who pulled them and by detectives who synchronize the feeds to dispatch time. The state also asks for a limiting instruction on certain statements to prevent speculation about motive beyond what witnesses and records support. One instruction is non-negotiable under Texas law. Because a cooperating participant will testify, the jury must be told that accomplice testimony requires independent corroboration, something more than the witness's word. Bail remains off the table for the organizer due to proven flight and pending capital exposure for the offense. With those rulings, the case walks into trial tight and admissible. The first capital trial centers on the gunman. Jurors hear a disciplined sequence: the garage clip establishing an arrival before the victim and a departure within minutes, the medical examiner confirming a single close-range shot with immediate incapacitation, the carrier analyst explaining how call/SMS metadata and tower sectors show device activity pausing before the crime and reappearing along the corridor after, and the firearms expert linking a recovered semi-automatic handgun to the shell casing through class characteristics and microscopic tool marks. The driver, already convicted on a plea, details planning stages that preceded the garage attack, aborted ideas, a promised payment, a fast grab framed as robbery. Her testimony is not left to stand alone. The state layers corroboration around it, a lender who confirms the Jeep's access, phone extractions that show cache imagery and short communications bracketing the event, and witnesses who place a dark Jeep leaving the structure right after the gunshot. The defense challenges perception, memory, and inference. They argue that tower sectors describe probability, not GPS, and stress that cameras do not capture a clear face in the act. Cross-examination presses the driver on her deal and the value of her freedom. The state answers not with rhetoric, but with its corroboration map. When the driver said the Jeep idled in view, the video timing matched. When she said the money changed hands quickly, a photo and timestamps existed. When she said the shooter expected payment in cash and drugs, phone content and testimony lined up. Jurors are instructed that if they believe the accomplice, they must still find independent evidence tying the defendant to the crime. In the end, they do. In a penalty phase where the law allows it, the prosecution presents aggravators, murder for remuneration, and a killing committed during a robbery, proved through the staged snatch of the victim's purse as the gunman fled. Mitigation evidence is considered and weighed. The verdict is stark: death. Whatever anyone believes about that punishment, the file shows the jury followed the path the law lays out: facts, aggravators, and instructions before reaching it. The organizer's trial runs on a different track because extradition from Mexico required a firm assurance: no death penalty. That condition is not a loophole. It is a treaty requirement respected by both countries and honored by the court. The state's case is narrower, but no less structured. Jurors see the planning's paper and pixels, contact patterns that escalate as the victim begins a new relationship, conversations about methods that shift from unrealistic to simple and fast, and a money arrangement that reaches a driver and a gunman. The cooperating witness gives a step-by-step of meetings and assignments. The state then does the same corroboration work: messages that show timing stressors, call logs that place participants in the right sectors at the right times, and the same garage video that anchors the window in which the plan becomes irrevocable. The defense emphasizes absence. The organizer never set foot in the garage, never pulled a trigger, and, by the time of indictment, was living across a border. The prosecution answers with law. In Texas, employing another to commit murder for remuneration completes capital culpability without a hand on the weapon. Jurors are again instructed about accomplice corroboration. They see it in the Jeep access confirmed by a third party, in carrier data showing coordinated communications before and after, and in a payment trail that does not begin or end with a single person's word. The verdict is guilty, and the sentence, bound by the extradition assurance, is life without the possibility of parole. The driver's case is addressed with equal clarity. She pleads and receives 35 years, her cooperation contract formalized in open court. That does not absolve her. It makes her accountable in a way the system can enforce while securing testimony the jury is entitled to hear and weigh with caution. The court explains this balance to the panel because it matters. Jurors must understand why a participant sits in the witness chair and what independent evidence must back her up before they can rely on her account. Appeals arrive in due course and are rejected. The rulings that controlled the trials, authentication of video, expert qualifications, chain of custody integrity, accomplice corroboration, and the extradition condition, survive review. The file closes in the way thorough prosecutions do, not with a flourish, but with a docket entry that leaves no ambiguity about responsibility. There is a human edge to this procedural line. Kendra Hatcher's life is not a set of exhibits, and the point of precision is not to drain meaning from grief. It is to make sure a jury's verdict reflects evidence that holds up when you strip away rumor and anger. In cities like Dallas, murders aren't just crimes. They test whether institutions can tell a clear story from chaotic minutes and then bear the weight of their decisions for years. That clarity is the respect the law can offer a victim and a community. Not speeches, but proof. Justice here did not rely on a single strand. Physical evidence fixed a shot and a weapon. Digital records anchored movement and timing. Testimony explained planning and roles, then was checked piece by piece against records that do not forget. The system's message, delivered quietly, is that jealousy and control do not survive timelines, cameras, and corroboration. If there is a lesson worth taking with us, it is that most conspiracies announce themselves in the admin. They leak through money transfers, borrowed cars, rehearsed stories, and phones that go dark at the same moment. The work is to listen. Guilty. Christopher Love sentenced to death. Brenda Delgado sentenced to life without parole. Crystal Cortez sentenced to 35 years. Thank you for staying with this case. If this helped you see how careful timelines, corroboration, and lawful cooperation can dismantle a murder-for-hire crime, share what part of the process surprised you most: video, carriers, or corroboration. As I close this story, I can't help but reflect on how quickly jealousy and control can spiral into devastating crime. Kendra Hatcher's murder reminds us that behind every headline is a real life cut short, and choices that can never be undone. Justice may have spoken in court, but the deeper lesson is ours. Pay attention to red flags, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the value of safety. What do you think? Does justice truly bring closure, or does it simply mark the end of one chapter? I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. And if this story reached you, subscribe to the channel so we can walk through the next case together.